Hi everyone, I'm Donnie Beaver from HalenHardy, and I'm standing along one of my favorite trout streams on the planet. And people ask me all the time, why did you create a career in environmental protection? And I'll tell you, this is why. My family were fly fishers. They loved to fly fish. Both of my grandfathers, my dad, and at age 6, they put a fly rod in my hand. And I learned quickly. As a matter of fact, I loved it so much that I developed this interest in tying flies. And by the age of 10, I was subcontracted to tie flies professionally for a local store called Uncle Joe's Woodshed. Today, I can walk to a trout stream within 3 minutes of my front door. But it wasn't so back when I was a kid. As a kid, most of these streams were polluted. Up near my home in Bellwood, 15 miles away, it was acid mine drainage. Down here, it was an open sewer, a pulp and paper mill. It was just a mess, and there were no trout left in the streams at all. 1972 was a turning point in my life. I was at college. I had basically flunked out of pre-med, wasn't doing that well, and my advisor, Dr. Leedy, said, why don't you think about entering this field of ecology? He said, Beef, it's an up-and-coming field. You love the outdoors. You love to fish. You love to hunt. How about coming to the Black Hills with us and learning more about ecology? So I spent the summer of 1972 in the Black Hills at our science station, and right before we got there, a flood devastated the valley. So we spent the first few weeks cleaning up after the flood, and the rest of the summer we studied how a flood affected the wildlife, the stream biology, the little bugs, the plankton, and the trout in the stream, which became sort of a baseline study in 1972 for that science station. And I knew right then and there I wanted to do things to help restore the environment. At the same time, back home here in Pennsylvania, Hurricane Agnes hit. And we had a flood here. The floodwaters were 19 feet above my head in this spot. And what happened was the flood scoured all the 100 years of industrial toxins and waste that was in this stream, and it all washed downstream. And then later that year, EPA instituted the Clean Water Act. And so the toxins weren't being introduced to the stream anymore. And by the time I graduated college in 1974, the stream had started to heal itself and was turning back into its original trout stream. So we're here today along one of my favorite trout streams, Bell's Run, or Bell's Gap Run, it's referred to. It's in my hometown. So this is my home turf. And if you recall yesterday, we were talking about the epiphany I had in college when my professor, Dr. Leedy, suggested that I turn my attention away from failing at pre-med to focusing on ecology, which was just an emerging field in 1972 and 73. And so my last 2 years at Wheaton College, I focused on actually being the guinea pig for developing the ecology program there. And so a lot of the curriculum was just made up as we went, and had the opportunity to actually do independent studies most of my last 2 years. And so Doc Leedy asked me, what do you want to do independent studies on? And I said, the stream that runs through my hometown, it used to be a great trout stream 20, 30, 40 years ago, but the acid mine drainage has affected it. There's still some trash fish, fall fish, suckers, chubs in it, but the trout really weren't sustainable. And so I said, I'd really like to see if I could study how could we reclaim the coal mine strippings on the mountain above me, and see if we could maybe turn that into a business. And he said, what, I've got a good idea. My next door neighbor is Dean Buntrock, who at the time was one of the founders of Waste Management, and Waste Management was just down the street from us. And he said, why don't you interview Mr. Buntrock and see if he has any suggestions. So after I did, came up with the basic thesis that the old strip mines could be reclaimed. We could use sludge that was being disposed of in cities like Philadelphia and actually get paid to take it off of Philadelphia's hands, And over time, we could reclaim the soil. And as we reclaimed the soil, the streams would heal itself and the wildlife would prosper. And we could have an outdoor hunting, fishing, recreational area that we might be able to engage people in supporting financially. So that was a basic premise, and Mr. Buntrock really helped me a lot. And in the back of my mind, I didn't know it at the time, I had a blueprint for my dream. But in the meantime, I needed to earn money. Fortunately, since I was a kid, I had developed a lawn mowing, snow shoveling, wall washing, window cleaning clientele in my hometown of Bellwood, Pennsylvania. And I mostly worked for mostly for spinsters. Actually, there were 4 different sets of sisters in our hometown who grew up in rather well-to-do families, lived together, each set lived together, never married, all had good either teaching jobs or professional jobs, and they had plenty of extra money, but what they couldn't do is climb ladders or push a lawnmower or shovel a sidewalk. So I thought, why not do the same thing in Wheaton, Illinois? Rather prosperous town. The neighboring town, Glen Ellen, was one of the wealthiest communities in the United States at the time. And so I went to the college employment office and I asked Miss Loving, M. Loving was her name. I never did find out what M stood for. But I said, can you give me the card file so I can look for people that need cleaning, painting, lawn services. And as I was going through, I got toward the back, and I noticed in the back there was a separate little section. And I said, what's this section? She said, oh, those are my toughest customers. And I said, what do you mean? She said, oh, they're very, very demanding, and most people won't work for them a second time. And I said, well, give me an example of who one of them is. And she said, well, one's actually the wife of the chairman of United Airlines. That's like, yeah, I'll take that one. And so she gave me 3 or 4 more of those types of folks. And as it turned out, they were my tribe. I was willing to do what no one else would do, climbing up 3 stories, taking off wooden storm windows, cleaning them sparkly, putting caulking back on them, painting the trim, putting them back neatly in place, and as my mom and dad taught me, being gracious and grateful. And it worked really well. And the next thing I knew, I had about 40 people working for me because I became the guy to go to for this kind of stuff, doing these jobs that nobody else wanted to do. So by the time I graduated college, I was actually making more money than I ever dreamed. It was pretty crazy. As a matter of fact, my dad asked me if I was doing something illicit or illegal because most of the people paid me in cash, and I always had a big wad of cash with me. So I graduated college. 6 weeks later, got married, and moved my bride, who was from back home here, and moved her to Illinois with me. And for 6 months, we stayed out there, but the recession hit, and I soon found that people who were out of jobs were willing to climb 3 stories on a wooden ladder and do the same job for less than I was willing to do it for. And so in March of '75, I said to Pam, let's move back to PA. Let's take this little business model and go back to PA because we know a lot of people. And so we came back, and my future dream was still intact. You know, in the back of my mind, I wanted to not be a flatlander anymore in Wheaton, Illinois. I wanted to get back to the mountains of Pennsylvania. I wanted to get back to the trout streams. And if you recall, the Clean Water Act had actually gotten these streams back in good shape. So I was really anxious to get home. And so we came home, and at first I started doing residential and commercial cleaning, which was pretty much what I did in Illinois. But by the late 1970s, I had morphed into industrial cleaning. My routine hadn't changed at all. I would always ask my future client, what's the nastiest job that nobody else wants to do? Because I had learned that that's what they were most concerned about. And number 2 is that's where the wallet opened up even more. And so I did that on a project basis, and then we started doing janitorial services in factories. And the method at the time in a machine shop or an envelope making plant or a paper cup manufacturing facility was they had high-speed machines that ran on oil, either hydraulics or cutting oils or some type of lubricants, and oil was getting sprayed onto the floor. And the classic way back then, that had been the standard method for 100 years since the Industrial Revolution started, was to throw kitty litter on the floor and then sweep it up, cart it off, and throw more kitty litter on the floor.
You know, it just didn't make sense to throw dirt on top of oil to clean it up. It makes a muddy, mucky mess. And something just didn't click in my brain. So, but I didn't think about it that much because it wasn't costing me really much money until I got a fixed contract at a big factory for janitorial services every day. And after a couple months, I realized I was losing about $1,500 a month in labor costs. And that just was unacceptable. So I figured I had to come up with a more efficient way.
So essentially what I did was I hired a college kid. I hired him to do time and motion studies of how fast could we sweep up kitty litter? How efficiently could we move it? Could we come up with a better cart to carry it in with a clean side and a dirty side? Could we come up with a right bristled broom and a shovel that was easier to shovel into? And we got it down by 20%.
So fortunately, we went from losing $1,500 a month down to only $1,200 a month, which seems like it was progress, but that was like half a month's take-home pay for me at the time. So I still had a long way to go.
I was on a 5-year fixed contract, so I had no choice but to try to figure out. I even went to the plant manager, rest his soul, at the time, and I lamented that I had guessed wrong. And he said, we have a contract. And I said, yes, we do. And so in honoring that contract, created a lot of sleepless nights trying to think, what would be a better way to do this? I came home one night, working between second and third shift, and our son, who wasn't even a year old yet, Josh, was crying, and my wife said, do you mind changing him? And I said, no, not at all. So I took him out of his crib, carried him over to the kitchen counter, laid him on the counter, forgot that the diaper bag was sitting on the floor. So I took his diaper off and I'm holding him with one hand. I reach around to get to the diaper and all of a sudden I feel this warm ooze coming down my arm and I look up and he's whizzing on me. And so I threw the diaper back up on him, grabbed a clean one, and just as it happened, it was like this epiphany. It's like, I wouldn't throw kitty litter on my kid. I can't imagine why I couldn't make a diaper for a machine. So I started, got him back to bed, he fell asleep, and I started messing around and had to sort of tiptoe in the bedroom, grabbed some of my basketball tube socks. I grabbed, actually I grabbed a pair of my wife's pantyhose, and this idea was unfolding in my brain. I had a couple bags of kitty litter in the vehicle, grabbed some rags too, and I started in the garage fabricating what would become the world's first absorbent sock. It was kitty litter stuffed in my tube socks, my wife's pantyhose. I even tried to roll up rags and put rubber bands on the end. That didn't work that well.
So I grabbed the socks and took them out to the leakiest machine in the plant. And I placed them around the end where it was leaking the most. And I told my summer intern, keep an eye on them and no cat litter. Just keep the cat litter away. And let's see how long it lasts. In the meantime, we were shoveling the cat litter around 100 machines every single day. However, at the end of the first week, the sock was still working. We didn't even have to move it at all. And then after 2 weeks, it was still working. And 3 weeks. And 4 weeks. And at the same time, we're shoveling and sweeping and pouring around 100 machines 30 times in that month. That's 3,000 cleanups while the sock was still sitting in one place working.
The socks were still working around the base of this machine. Had to reposition them a little because it got sort of soaked in one area, but just slid them around a little. So, end of the day, we went to Goodwill Industry, Salvation Army. We bought up every tube sock, every crew sock, every pantyhose, used panty, believe it or not, they had them back then. We filled it and we covered every factory machine in that envelope plant. And our labor was cut by 90%. I was actually making money again. And so that was in the early 80s. I thought it was a really cool tool for our janitorial business. I saw it as a secret weapon that my competitors didn't have, that I could go in and outbid them on jobs. I just saw it as a way to make our contracting business more profitable. We had a large job in Cincinnati, Ohio at an aircraft engine plant. And after we were done cleaning for the summer cleanup, I left socks. By then we had figured out how to buy a knit sock. I left socks around the base of every machine in the plant, sort of as a ribbon on our cleanup job. And a month later, the purchasing agent at the plant called back and said, "Hey, I'd like to buy some of those socks from you." And it's like, "Oh, you need me to come out and deploy new ones?" And because I was in the cleaning business, I wasn't in the sock business. And he said, "No, no, no. I just want to buy the socks." And I said, "Well, we don't sell the socks by themselves." And he said, "Well, let me explain it this way. We are the XYZ company, and we can make aircraft engines. We can make those stupid socks too. So either you want to sell them to me or you don't." And I said, "Well, okay, let me think about it." And by then we were filling the socks with corn cobs, which were a lot more efficient. And so we said, "Okay, here's the price." And as it turns out, the guy said, "I'll basically take the equivalent of half a truckload." And it was like, uh-oh, we've got a tiger by the tail here. And so within a year, we had actually sold the cleaning business and got into producing. It was the only product we had at the time. Fortunately, I was able to attract a really great team of people right here from my hometown. And we got out in the trenches. One of the agreements I had with the guy I sold my business to was he'd let us use his accounts for experimentation. And so we just basically got out in the trenches every week, and we got to see other problems people were having. And we soon found out that there were other methods, other sizes and shapes of things. So we started, first offshoot was a pan filled with absorbents, so it didn't slosh around. And then we had absorbent pillows next, and that was followed by absorbent mats. And we hooked up with a manufacturer who could dimple multiple layers of mats together with ultrasound, and we pioneered what's today a standard dimpled mat. We then were encouraged to get into hazmat, and it was just in the late 80s when RECL was coming on, and we were reading the regulations and saw that spill kits would be a really, really great idea for people to have in spill-prone areas. Again, inside factories, pretty focused. So we started making spill kits for loading docks and drums and overpack drums. And we even, the local fire department came to us and said, "We're starting a hazmat team. Could you make a hazmat trailer?" And so to the best of my knowledge, we might have had one of the world's first hazmat trailers in 1987, 88. But all along, we were working side by side. The quid pro quo for us was, we got to be out there with you. We've got to see this in action. It's the fastest way for us to improve it. And so we did that. And as a company developed in the late 80s, we just said, we want to be where the challenges are. Heck, we even sent a crew to Exxon Valdez. We learned what we didn't want to do also by that experience. But basically what we were trying to do, by then we had a couple tech people who were studying the regs, seeing what was coming down the pike. We saw ahead of time that hazardous materials spill training was going to be necessary. So to the best of my knowledge, we created the world's first hazmat spill training video, literally on an 8-track tape. By the mid-1990s, I had fulfilled my typical role, which is starting up companies, looking at problems, solving them, putting a team together, really putting a system in place of how do we communicate with our customers, how do we serve them. And by the time we had about 100 employees, it was like, okay, mission accomplished, what's next? And by then, I realized that I might be able to pull off my trout stream conservation job. The problem was, by then, all the money had dried up for reclaiming coal mines. or at least it wasn't readily available. And in most cases, they were tens of $1 million jobs, very, very complex. And I looked at that and said, geez, that's just a little out of my wheelhouse.
So instead of acid mine drainage, which seemed like a huge problem to solve, I discovered there was a new challenge out there with trout streams. And it was basically industrial farming, where the farmers would allow the cows to wander down along the banks of any trout stream. They would eat all the vegetation in the riparian corridor. When the rains came, it would wash away the banks and the water would get very wide. And so I decided to start working with landowners, mostly farmers. A few cases there were other landowners who leased their land out to farmers. And we figured out how to repair the riparian corridors and to bring in the width of the stream, keep the cows out except for places where they would drink, let the vegetation grow back up. And literally, in some cases, within a year, the trout stream had rebounded and was as good as ever. And so once I had that, it took 2 or 3 years to get that process going. Once I had that going, I thought, okay, now how do I afford to keep rolling with this? And so I recruited like-minded partners. And I shared my vision of what my grandparents, my parents, and I, and with my kids, what I was doing to preserve these properties for future generations. And as I shared the vision, I found out that I could speak to various angling clubs, they were called, fly fishing clubs. And I spoke from Boston to DC to Chicago and every major city in between. So I was fortunate to be able to recruit about 100 families by 2007. And you're saying, what does this have to do with oil spills in the rain? What does trout have to do with that? Well, I just sort of have a hunch that if you're in the environmental field or if you work in industrial maintenance in the outdoors, you probably love the outdoors. And I'm guessing you want to leave the world a better place than you found it. So what it has to do with you today is I want to try to find the best practices when it comes to cleaning up oil spills, especially in wet weather. And I want to partner with people who feel the same. And that's why I'm telling you the story about the trout streams. And in the next video, we're going to see about how we're working on putting together an entire program. As fate would have it, a number of the people that I recruited as partners in the club were involved in the oil and gas industry. You might know it as fracking. And they loved the outdoors, and I was able to engage them in helping us preserve these trout streams as the fracking boom increased in Pennsylvania. And once they connected the dots, my friends in the fracking industry figured out that I was the guy conserving the trout streams on one hand, but I had a lot of experience in cleaning up spills. They started complaining to me and basically saying, hey, were you involved with inventing some of this stuff that doesn't work? And it's like, yeah, sorta. Why? And well, you need to come out and see it. The stuff that we're being sold just doesn't work on the well pads. And so of course I had to see for myself, and I was able to get invitations to go out to various frac sites. And I got to tell you, it was the biggest mess I had ever seen. The first 5 or 6 I visited had many things in common. They were like a giant wading pool. They had a plastic liner inside to supposedly keep the spills inside, usually 1 inch to 6 inches of water floating around, covered with a giant oil slick. And as my fishing clients started to show me where they were applying absorbent products, white spill sheets, socks, pads, I just shook my head and I said, look, of course the crap doesn't work. It was made for a different application. It wasn't made to put around a wet site to capture these leaks and drips and spills. Matter of fact, most of this stuff was made to be used indoors, not outdoors. And you have them in all the wrong applications and all the wrong products. As a matter of fact, as I looked at it and I just shook my head and I said to my colleague, there haven't been any improvements in 25 years. um, really ever since I left the day-to-day of this industry, nothing's really changed. And worst of all, there was zero training. No one was teaching people what to do. And I connected the dots and figured out that because the products had become a commodity and they were being sold by distributors with tens of thousands of other products, nobody knew how products should work and what they should do or what they couldn't do. And so we did a quick calculation after we visited about 10 well pads, and we multiplied times the number of well pads just in the Marcellus and Utica region, and we figured they were wasting millions of dollars in time and money and materials and waste and vac trucks a year. And so we said they just need new products, new processes, and especially they need their training upgraded. So I put my old industrial cleaning hard hat on and recruited a team to help me figure this out. And the first guy I called was my old friend and head of R&D at our first company in the spill business, Denny Middleton. So we worked side by side with one particular frac company's crews. The CEO had actually invited us in. And together we started to crack the code. And we were fortunate enough to discover a family of recycled materials. And in the next video, you're going to learn what that is. But in the meantime, we want to show you why the old stuff doesn't work in wet conditions. And so here you're going to see our trough demonstration that we set up in our lab. As far as I know, it's the only one like it in the world, where we test moving water, simulated rain conditions, so that we can show how various spill control materials work in the water and then how they react with oil and fuel. And so you'll notice here that the white spill pads do not like water. So the water beads up, runs across, and as the water's running across, it carries the oil with it because the oil floats on top of the water. And so only about 30% of the white spill pad is going to get used. 70% is going to be wasted. Another problem that we have is in the field. So we go out to the field, and first of all, we set up a storm drain. We completely protect the underside of the storm drain with materials that won't let any oil or sheen escape before we start doing these tests. But then we test things like clay. And in the clay video, you'll see how we put the clay down in the middle of a rainstorm, and the stuff fails miserably right away. You're also going to see how we use white socks and white spill sheets to try to protect this drain. And you'll also discover that the oil sheen just makes its way through, in, under, around. The socks even float, and the oil scoots around it and goes into the drain. And then finally, you'll see how our new materials work. And you'll get a glimpse of the training that we're starting to develop and the new methods and the better ways to learn how to stop spills in their tracks and prevent them from going down the drains and polluting the streams. So in preparation for doing these training videos, we've sent out surveys to our clients. As a matter of fact, earlier this week, we asked, what are the top 2 burning questions that you have about controlling oil spills in wet weather? And we got dozens of replies. I was just blown away. And so in the next video, we're going to tell you about what some of those replies were and how we're tailoring our training to exactly what our customers are asking for. I was just blown away this morning with one of the replies we got from our survey. And a seasoned environmental professional said, it's about time you guys come out with new training. The industry hasn't done anything since the 1980s. That's why I'm so excited to address all these questions that you have in this upcoming video series. Now the big question is, what questions do you have? And I'd really love you to go to the comments section at the bottom here and write in what's the top 2 questions you have about controlling and cleaning up oil spills, fuel spills in wet conditions. I'm Donnie Beaver, and I'll see you in a couple days.